Hey everyone, welcome to Home Cooking with Foodland. We hope that everyone has had their fill of crispy rice cakes with spicy ahi. And even if you didn't make them crispy rice cakes, I hope you made that spicy ahi because that's like super delicious and it can be one of your core like go-to repertoire items. We thought that for this class we would have fun. I know we're kind of on the tail end of the Okinawan festival, but I thought we would focus on some things that are Okinawan dishes and um, just really delicious. And I think that's one of those. I was thinking about doing like Okazuya food, and I think some of the stuff I'm going to show you, you will find at Okazuya. Um, but just I thought I would do two fun dishes that I think are quintessential for the Okinawan cuisine, and one is Rafute, which is a like a shoyu braised pork belly, and then the other one is Champuru, which is bitter melon and it has egg and tofu in it. And if you've not made these before, I think they'd be fun for you to try. And if you've not tried bitter melon, I think it's worth trying, and it'll be an interesting discussion in the family or the get together to see who likes what. Before we get started, of course, if you have questions, please do not hesitate to ask them using the chat Q&A function in Zoom. And as you all know, I do enjoy the questions because that's the way I feel like we're having a conversation. So please ask, and I'll try to do my best to find an answer for you. If not, I'll try to find a workaround for you. So without further ado, why don't we go ahead and get started? So we're gonna do two dishes, and if I can do it, I'll try to get some extra credit in. But because there's a braise involved, I figured, well, I gotta start the braise and we'll do some different things. So we'll start with getting the pork going. And so I have pork belly here, and this is island raised local pork belly, and it's skin on, as you can see. And we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna get it in some water here. Now, I have room temperature water that I have in a pot. We're just gonna put this in straight into the pot. And I wanna make sure that the water is covering the pork belly. Now, the question that you may want to be asking is, why am I starting with cold water? And why is it important? And so technically you can make this dish without doing that, but what we're doing here is we're starting with cold water because we want the pork to be in here as the temperature rises. And as the temperature rises and it comes to boil, it will start to pull out impurities and all that kind of like scum and foam that you get when you're making something. So we're doing that first step to get all of that stuff out. And then when we go back and finish the dish or add the braising liquid, you won't have all that continuous skimming to have to do. So that's the first step that we're gonna do. And I have this on high, got it in the cold water, and that's what that looks like. And we're gonna let it do its thing. And as it comes together, we'll come back and check. But I wanna keep this thing moving, so we'll start to move on to the bitter melon. Okay. So here we have our bitter melon. I'm gonna probably use 3 of these. And what the heck, I'll just do all 4 of them. But we're gonna go ahead and get these ready. I'm gonna cut this, trim the end off, cut them down in the middle. And you can see what that looks like.
So the first question is there any way to make the bitter melon not so bitter?
I'm gonna show you the best way that I know how, and we'll see. You guys can all take a look and see. The best way that I know how is like use something else. I'm just kidding. But I'll show you what I think, and we'll see how it goes. So I'm cutting them in half, and then we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna scoop out the centers here. So this white pith and the seeds, this is all really bitter. Okay. So we're gonna scoop all that out. And what I'm focusing on doing here, you see how it quickly just starts to peel off easily? Most of that came out, right? But I'm also gonna get in here to try to get as much of that white out. When you think about eating an orange, right? The pith, the white part of the pith of an orange, if you eat that, it's bitter, right? So and also when you think about peppers, some of that white pithy part of peppers is very bitter too, right? And so this pith I believe to be very bitter as well. So just step 1 to minimize that bitterness, right, is to try to really get all this white pith out. I'm really getting in here and scraping it to try to really capture all that.
Keoni, instead of the bitter melon,
Mhm.
have you tried this with hechima or nabetta?
You know what is nabetta? I know the name, but I can't even
Nabetta.
think of nabetta. What is that? You guys can Google that for me. My fact checkers. One thing you can do with this too is I wasn't sure if I was gonna get this because right now bitter melon is kind of tight in supply, and I picked up some fresh okra. So you could do this with okra if you like the okra texture. The thing about okra, right? It's gonna be definitely less bitter, but it has that that yama imo kind of like sort of like slimy texture. So if you like that, that can also work. Okay, so cut this a myriad of different ways. You could cut it in a bias with that. Or you just cut it straight down half moon. When you think about other people's bitter melon you had before, right? When you think about the rings, maybe the one that's been really bitter has been really, really thick with the with that white part. I'm gonna kind of like try to go faster. What's that better?
They're both gourds.
Okay. So based on that, I would say yeah, you can try as just as long as it holds the texture, yeah. Let's go take a look at the pork real quick.
Did you wash the pork first? And is there a leaner alternative? And what kind of pork is this?
So I did not wash the pork first. It looked really soft. It wasn't like it was really clean. There wasn't a lot of juice or any bleeding, so I didn't think it needed it. If you could if you wanted to, and this is pork belly, so it's just local pork belly. If you wanted a leaner option, I would say you could use like pork shoulder or pork butt, but you still need to start with something that's designed to be braised or slow cooked for a long period of time to get tender. And so when you're going to braise something, you want something that has a lot of connective tissue so that you're trying to break it down, or a lot of collagen so that it also helps tenderize the piece of meat, or fat. And so in this example, there's a lot of fat, and that fat's going to make this very, very delicious. And it also tenderizes this thing too. So, one thing you could do is look for, go through the pieces that you see at the store and try to find the leaner pieces. I know there are some people that really like fat, and some people, it's kind of like too much. But so the thing is, you could use like pork butt, pork shoulder. I would not use like anything lean, like a tenderloin or a your loin, because that's meant to be cooked almost like a steak. Like if you think about, ribeye, you grill those, you don't braise those. When you think about chuck and you think about those cuts of meat that are made for stewing, that's the same relative kinds of cuts you want to use here. So as you can see, take a look here. I wanted to show this see how it's starting to get hot and it's coming up to a simmer, and you see all this white stuff that's coming up. That's the reason why we're doing this process. Now, some recipes you will see call for this to be done multiple times, 2 or 3 times. And the reason why is you're just getting more and more of those impurities out. I'm just going to do it once so we can keep the show going. But you could also do it a couple times if you wanted to, and you're just getting all the impurities out. So I'm skimming that out, and we're letting it do its thing. Okay, so we'll come back here and see it's coming up to boil. When it comes to boil, I'm gonna let it simmer for just a little bit, and then we'll come back to it. Let me finish this here.
Can you tell us how you choose bitter melons? Like, are you looking for something soft to the touch or hard to the touch or a certain color?
Um, when you're using bitter melon, you're trying to find pieces that have a nice, this is a really bright color, that are firm, that don't feel mushy, that has a nice bounce back when you get it. And I like smaller ones. The bigger they are, the woodier they tend to get. So I like smaller size, really nice, kind of a bright green color. And you're looking for stuff that doesn't have dents in it and that doesn't feel like it's pitting. So those are what I'm looking for.
And there are some that are, if there are some spiky ones and smooth ones, are the smooth ones better, or does it make a difference?
You know, I don't have experience with the smooth ones. You would have to try. I mean, I've also seen in other markets the tiny little ones that you just gotta experiment. But this is the ones that we sell in our stores, and these are the ones I'm most familiar with.
And why are the seeds different color?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it just depends on the maturity of that particular bitter melon and the sun that it's getting, but they're all the same. These are all the same. So I'm gonna salt this now, okay? And I'm gonna be generous with the salt. And so what I'm trying to do here by salting this is extract moisture, right? Salt, the salt will act as, I forget what the scientific term is, hydroscopic, I believe, which means it's pulling out, hydroscopic. Anyway, it's trying to pull, it's gonna dissolve here and pull the liquid out. So just like when you have a salad, sometimes if you get the salad, you cannot really hold it for the next day because it's gonna get all wilted and soggy, right? So this is what we're doing here. We're salting this, and we want to pull out all that moisture, and that moisture is gonna pull out some of that bitterness that we're trying to do. So we're talking about the pith already. That's gonna help scraping it down to get to the green part, and now we're salting it so that we can try to really extract all of that, as much bitterness as we can. Okay, let's take a look at the pork here. Okay, so now it's come to a simmer, and you can see all these impurities that have come out.
You talked about doing this process several times, which you're not doing tonight, but if you did, would you start from cold water?
Yes, every time you do the thing, the second time you do it, you start again with cold water. And what you have to start with the cold water because you want, if you basically what you're doing is, when you start with the cold water can go and penetrate into the meat. If you start with hot water and you drop it into hot water, the hot water automatically starts to essentially cook or sear the outside, which seals the outside. So you want to start in cold water so that it can pull out, because it can still penetrate into the piece of meat and pull out those impurities. And that's why it's important to start with the cold water every time you go ahead and do this process. Now, as you can see, right, all after that first skimming, really, there's not a whole lot that's coming out of here. And that's a good sign.
You know, going back to the bitterness question with the bitter melons, is bitterness determined by size? So, like, for example, are the smaller ones more bitter?
I don't have a clear answer for that, or a scientific answer for that. I would say that my gut instinct would say that the smaller ones are less bitter than the bigger ones, because as something grows larger, it tends to have more opportunity to increase that bitter factor and or also, you know, capture more of that sunlight and really the maturity of the thing is what makes it bitter. Now, this is a theory that I have, so I could be completely wrong, because like if you're eating a green fruit versus a ripe fruit, that's going to be tannic and bitter. But I think in this instance, because the bitter melon in itself is a very bitter item, I think that the less mature it is, the less bitter it's going to be. But I could be totally wrong. Okay, so I'm going to, yeah, if you like the bitterness, you can do the opposite of everything I did. Leave the pith in and don't salt it. But that's bitter. So I'm gonna pour this out in the sink real quick. Now I'm going to rinse out the pot because I'm gonna use the same pot. And I'm also going to go ahead quickly with cold water, put this back on the stove. I'm gonna rinse this out too. Just any last minute impurities that may be on here, I'm gonna rinse this out, okay? And then I'm gonna drain this. We're gonna go ahead and put it back into the pot. And then we're gonna get the braising liquid going. Okay, so I'm gonna put it back in here in a single layer. I'm not trying to sear it, by the way. I just happen to be putting it, it's kind of getting warm, right? And then we're gonna get our braising liquid going. So I have 2.5 cups of here. This is dashi that I made, and it is, you know, it'd be great if I had time to make it from scratch with kombu and all that, but this is actually, you know, a whole dashi mix that I added with water, 2.5 cups. I'm gonna pour in here. Then I also have a piece of, oh, sorry, I have some, this is brown sugar. I have light brown sugar, this is what I had. And so the thing I wanted to show you to remind everyone is, in a lot of instances, use what you got. I called for dark brown, I had light brown, I'm gonna use it, okay? Now this is also, in Okinawa, there's a sugar called kokuto that they use, and it's brown sugar that's refined, that's made from the cane that they harvest in Okinawa. And what's interesting about that is it has a more molasses smoky quality. So if you're trying to replicate that and that smoky quality, I think is interesting. That would probably make a really nice add character to this. You know, what you could do is add a little bit of brown sugar and a little bit of molasses, because I think it would sort of replicate that. But again, don't let that stop you. Use what you have, okay? So that sugar is going in there. I have a piece of ginger that I'm just gonna smash. And then we're gonna go ahead and put that in. Give it a quick shake. Okay, then we're gonna put some, the recipe calls for awamori, which is Okinawan soju. And we don't have that. So the sub for the recipe is soju, so is other soju or sake. And what I have here is, this is imu soju that I was able to get. And imo is sweet potato. So this is soju made from sweet potato and also rice. But the primary item that they're using to ferment and distill is sweet potato. So we're gonna add 1/2 cup of that. And one thing I wanted to mention about, you know, as I've explored more Japanese, Okinawan cooking, you know, a lot of the cooking that we do in local style tends to be like shoyu sugar, maybe some water. But what I have found is the cooking that we do here tends to be very sweet and very salty. And as you see the recipes and you explore more traditional recipes, you're seeing that, or I'm seeing that the base really is dashi, which is Japanese stock, right? And then sugar and shoyu are added as flavoring agents, but it's not like the primary. So you saw how much, I only had like 1/2 cup of the sugar that I added into 2.5 cups of the stock. And on the shoyu here, I'm only gonna add about 3 tablespoons. And that's it. Now, what's interesting, what I like about the smell here, what I'm liking about what I'm getting from the soju is I'm getting a little bit of smoky quality. So I'm getting some of that smoke that technically you would get from using the traditional Okinawan brown sugar, which is going to add nice, more complexity and character to this dish. You're going to get ginger in here. But again, and it's going to reduce too. So you still are going to get sweetness, but it's not going to be like cloying sweetness like I think of sometimes when I have like local style teriyaki, which is really sweet. So we'll let this simmer. And then we'll come back to the front here. Let's take a look at our bitter melon.
Keoni, your theory was correct because somebody sent in what they found on Google. And it says, the more mature the bitter gourd, the more bitter it is. Young bitter gourd should be light green in color and thick, and its seeds are usually white. When the bitter gourd ripens and matures, and I guess gets darker as well, the bitter gourd will be very bitter. So you were.
Okay. So the other thing I was thinking about when I was talking about this too was asparagus. So if you've ever had white asparagus, it's very mild, and they really grow that. They bury the asparagus so that the sunlight doesn't hit it, so it doesn't develop chlorophyll, which is bitter. And so, right on, awesome. Can I get a virtual gold star from everyone? Okay, you can see that it's getting it's starting to liquid starting to come out of here, right? So we'll let it sit a little bit. I'm gonna let it sit a little bit here, and while we're kind of letting that do its thing, we're gonna let the pork do its thing. I'm gonna move on to just a quick salad to kind of like bridge the gap while this is going on. So one of the things that we love in our local culture is tomato watercress salad, and it's a very simple salad. So I thought I'd make one because I think it would be a good accompaniment to these two dishes that we're making. So it's very simple. I have watercress here, and I'm gonna put some in the middle. You can toss it, but I'm just gonna layer it here. So I have the watercress. I know our locals, you know, like the watercress, Sumida Farms watercress, which is the best stuff. Is really, really delicious. And I ate all the stems already, but you know how local style we have the stems. I ate the stems, I made soup with it. But if you like the stems, you can totally put them in here. I take the stems and I make it for soup, or I eat it with mayonnaise, don't tell anyone. And then I save the tender tops for the salad. So I'm just gonna put a bunch of that in here, okay? We'll start with that. Now we have two kinds of tomatoes here. Well, these are Kawamoto. I'm sorry, Kamuela from the Big Island. I want to cut some of these up. I'm just gonna go in here, just so I don't waste. I'm gonna just cut this core out. And then we're gonna go ahead and go, you can go, I mean, you could go in here if you wanted to and do some wedges. They're beautiful, nice, kind of like, or you could dice. So dice would be more like this. And when people think of make like local style tomato watercress salad, you know, you might be making, I mean, you're gonna start with great watercress because the tomato farm stuff is awesome, right? But then you might just be buying whatever, you know, maybe a conventional tomato, and they might be light bread, not a whole lot of flavor. But what I'm using here is this is a vine ripe tomato from the Big Island, and it's really delicious. But I figured, hey, why not? Let's kick it up a notch, right? And I really, really like Whole Farms tomatoes. And this is their family tomatoes here. So it's a bunch of different tomatoes, right? And when we're cooking, right, we're always trying to find ways to add color and excitement and dimension to the dishes. And so if you've had a salad like this at home and you can think about what that salad looks like, it might be, you know, just simple with like I said, the tomatoes and regular tomatoes and the watercress. But see, as you can see now, what I'm doing is I'm adding these other tomatoes, which are very sweet, but also have good acidity, and they have different flavors based on the different kind of tomato. So I'm adding complexity to this dish, right? And I'm adding color, which is, you know, that visual interest, which I think is very important. Now I have some local Aloha Tofu that I'm going to use here. I'm just cut a slice off of this. This is firm, easier to work with. If you wanted to, you could use soft, but that one's just a lot more delicate. So go ahead and we'll cut some of that. By the way, if you want to cut something into four and you're not sure how to get it even, first thing you want to do is cut it in half, and then cut your halves in half. Then we get, you know, even cut. So we'll add some of that.
What is the best way to wash watercress? Because we know that watercress needs to be washed really well if you eat it fresh.
Yeah, so I mean, the best way to wash watercress is what I do is I take you. The best way would be to fill up your sink with water. Take the watercress off, submerge it in the water, shake it all out, let it float, and all of the impurities will sink. And you have to have plenty of water so to separate the top floating from the bottom. Take that out, shake it out, and use a salad spinner or use a towel, and then dry it and use it. When you're on the fly, take the whole bunch, shoot it down with plenty of water, shake it, shake it, shake it. do a visual inspection, make sure there's not any like little bugs or little snails and any of that kind of stuff. But this is natural product, and that does happen. So you're gonna find that kind of stuff. Okay. All right. So that's the salad there. Now, if you wanted to, you could do is add some sesame seeds, color, texture, flavor, right? And as you know, a lot of local style would do, they would add tuna to this, right? Which also adds protein, flavor, substance, and complexity. So now we're gonna make just a quick dressing. And the basics of any dressing really is acid, seasoning, and oil. And so that's one thing to think about. And the ratios typically you're seeing is some say it's 75% acid to 25% fat or oil. Some people will say 1/3, 2/3, 1/3 being fat. So you can play with what your preferences are. So I'll start with this. I'm gonna add shoyu. And I'm also gonna add for acid. The shoyu is good for flavor and for umami. I'm gonna add rice wine vinegar for acidity. I'm also gonna, you could actually add some of this to the salad, but what I want is a little bit sweetness and I want some ginger flavor. So I'm gonna take fruits that you guys all might just be throwing away and add it to this to season it, sweeten it, and give it ginger flavor. By the way, also you can use it to make a really good martini. And then I'm gonna add, this is a gochugaru, which is a Korean chili powder because I like spice, a little bit in there. And then a little bit of vegetable oil. I have this grapeseed oil that I used to saute. Vegetable oil is fine. A little bit there. If you wanted to, you could add some sesame oil. You could add sesame seeds to this. If you felt like you needed to, you could add some salt. But I feel like the shoyu in there gives it enough of that seasoning. And then basically, I would treat this as a broken dressing. So it's gonna, you can see the separation of the shoyu, vinegar, and the oil. But you just got to make sure that when your people are your guests or you are going to use it as a dressing, you kind of stir it and then you drizzle it on. And I wouldn't pre-season this because it would make that salad wilt. And then you let your guests have control over that. Okay. All right. So now taking a look at this. Now the recipe calls for a 20-minute sit. And so we're gonna do like TV style, right? Where I'm not gonna do 20 minutes, but you get the picture, right? As you can see, it is definitely getting wet, right? So now what I'm going to do real quick, just to show you. Is I'm gonna put these on a paper towel. And I'm going to first try to squeeze out as much moisture as I can. So I'm gonna cover it up. And I'm really gonna get in here. I'm gonna push down on this, like really get my weight into this. By the way, if you're making namasu, right, this is a good thing to do too, because you can take some of that extra cucumber water out and that helps firm up and crisp up the cucumbers. Basically, you're treating this like a quick cure. So you can see already, put this back in here. Some of this water that I was able to get off. You can see it all in here. Paper towel is nice and soaked, right?
Keoni, you didn't have to rinse this out off?
Oh, well, I'm not done yet. So now we're gonna come over to the sink and then I'm gonna pour this in. First, I first soaked it with the paper towels because before I do this step, I wanna start by trying to get all of that juice out that's already in there. If I go into this step without taking the juice out, I might just be getting water all over the thing and not really extracting. So now that I sucked out as much juice I can on those paper towels, I'm gonna come in here and wash it. So I'm really just I'm getting all the excess salt out. And I'm also squeezing this because I'm trying to squeeze more of that juice out and washing it out, rinsing, getting it to wash out in the water, okay? And then you want to drain this. And then we're gonna go back over there. We're gonna go one more time with paper towels. Really try to dry this out. By the way, take a look at what we have here. So as you can see, we're doing a light simmer, but you see how it's not foaming up? And the reason it's not foaming up is we took all those impurities out. Now, what you can do in this braising process every so often is flip the piece over because it will help bathe it and even more evenly absorb the braising liquid. As it gets more tender, you might not be able to flip it like I just did, but right now, see how firm it is? It's very, very tough. So we're gonna let it do its thing. And then we're gonna come work on those bitter melon. Okay. I would say it's it's low. So you want to get it whatever that you're setting at on your stove is, so that it has very lazy bubbles. So that depends on everyone's is a little bit different, but you're trying to get a very low, slow bubble in there. If it's bubbling really quick, that's like more like rapid boil, which is too harsh, and it'll break up the dish and it'll cloud the stock. So you want it to be low. You know that they say slow and slow, right? Because you want it to be low, which helps allow the tissues to slowly break down and gelatinize and make a very tender, luxurious dish.
Have you ever done this in the Instapot or pressure cooker?
I have not, but you can. I think, and I've done pressure cooker cooking with an Instapot essentially is the same thing as a pressure cooker, right? It is a very aggressive cooking technique because it's more vigorous and the pressure does help it break down faster. But I do think that there is a difference in experience you're gonna get. It's more subtle cooking and the pieces stay better intact. So, but you can. So what I'm trying to do now is dry it out, but also, again, pick up as much juice as I can from the bitter melon to help minimize that bitterness. Because for those of you who have not had bitter melon, even with all this work, it's still going to be bitter. It is bitter. So without all this work, typically it's very, very bitter. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just place these paper towels in the bowl one more time, and I'll put this all in just to see if there's any last moisture that it can pick up. And you can see that there's all that moisture here. Okay. So now I did want to show you this. The recipe that I showed you is take the tofu and just kind of pat it dry. Since I had time, what I did was I took the tofu that's gonna go in the champuru, and I put it on a paper towel. As you can see, it's really, really wet. And then I also put another paper towel over it, and then I put this block on top of it as a weight to try to push it down to squeeze out as much moisture as I can. So if you have time, this is a good process so that you have good texture and it doesn't just become waterlogged when you make your champuru. So you find something that can push it down without crushing it, but that process of pushing, you can see it even more. Like if I push down here, see the water that's squeezing out of there, like here. So the more weight that I would put on here, the more water extraction I would get, and just a drier tofu product I would get, which would crumble better and hold its shape better when you make the dish. You can see some of the water coming out. Okay, so this is looking nice and dry. You can see all that moisture that's in these two. There's a ton of moisture in here. It's gonna be good. We can go ahead. Let's take a look here real quick. We can go ahead and get this started. I'm gonna switch the pork over here so we can make the champuru. I'm gonna start to heat up this wok. We'll let that cook. One thing I'm gonna do quickly is I have some 2 eggs and we're gonna go ahead and just quickly whisk.
Keoni, would salting the bitter melon overnight in the fridge help with the bitterness?
It can, but the problem with doing that is salinity. And so 20 minutes is good because it allows the salt to start to pull out the moisture without the salt completely penetrating all of the bitter melon. If you just salted and left it in overnight, what you might end up with, even though you rinse it, is really just salty, over salted bitter melon. So if you're gonna try that, I would err on the side of less salt, put it in overnight, then rinse it and taste it. Because it's almost like when you make smoked salmon or you cured salmon, all these kinds of different items, the salt is curing the product, and the more moisture it pulls out, the salt starts to go into the product. And the game that we're playing when you're doing it 20 minutes in this process is you're kind of seasoning, you actually are, you're seasoning the bitter melon and pulling moisture out, and you're trying to time the balance of salt penetration to moisture extraction so that it's still palatable. Because if you do too far one way or the other, it's just going to be really, really salty. So that's one thing you got to be careful for. Okay. This. Okay, we're going to heat this up. Get this wok nice and hot. Let it heat up a little bit. I don't. For those of you, I don't remember, I did a wok class, and that was like my brand new wok, and I use it like crazy. And now it's really nice and seasoned. You see how black it is on the inside? And when I use this wok, I don't use soap. I don't use a scouring pad. I immediately cook it, and then I just very quickly wipe it out, and it just continues to season and season, and it has a really nice non-stick coating now. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit it with some oil. Let's coat the bottom. You don't have a wok, it's fine. You can use a pan, like a 12-inch pan, or even a pot like this, as long as it has a wide bottom and a not too tall top, so you can saute. And by the way, you see that water spatter? I had some on my hand. That's why it's important also to get it dry, so you don't get that splatter.
Keoni, if you were to make other dishes with bitter melon, would you prepare the bitter melon the same way?
Meaning like salt it?
Yes. Like if you make beef with a Chinese beef with bitter melon dish.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go about it. Even if you're gonna like cut it and stuff it with like pork hash or something, it's a good way to like salt it to get all that stuff out. But again, it goes back to the other viewer's question, like if I really like bitter, do I need to do that? And the answer is no. So, but if you're trying to manage the bitterness, then yes, that's definitely something that you should, I think you want to do as a preparation stage. The other thing that people do, as we're talking about salting, right? Eggplant for a lot of people is really bitter too. So a lot of people do an eggplant is they'll cut the eggplant out, they'll salt it to extract some of that moisture too, do a rinse, and then go ahead and cook it. So that's another vegetable that I think people also will treat in a similar way. But notice I threw this in the pan and I didn't do anything, right, until just now. And so when you're cooking it isn't always about like constantly moving the pan. Right now, I want it to cook and I want to sear and caramelize. So I'm letting it sit, do its thing on the bottom surface. Then I'm gonna toss it to get to the other side. See that? That's what I'm looking for. We'll let it do its thing a little bit. Meanwhile, it's doing its thing. You can see the pork, like, see, that's a little fast. The question about how high, this speed of bubbling is too much. So I'm actually gonna turn it down. And what I have found in testing the recipe here is, on average, you're gonna wanna cook it for about an hour and a half, probably, to get it to be tender. And you wanna, when you're checking it, you're gonna take your fork and you wanna, you hear the term fork tender, and that really is a real term, because what you wanna do is you wanna poke into this. See right now, look, it's like fighting the fork, right? So it's totally not ready. But when this fork slides in and does not yield, it yields to the fork, then you know you're ready. But you're gonna cook this like an hour, hour and a half, and then it'll become very tender. And then you're gonna have extra liquid here, right? And I want it to be more of a glaze. But the first step is to cook it till it's tender at this low temperature, because you want it to be gentle. And then once you get to that tenderness, you are gonna turn the heat up. Because what you wanna do when you turn the heat up is you want to reduce the liquid so that it becomes a glaze. And you'll see what I mean in a little bit, okay? By the way, I was tossing it, and if that's not comfortable for you, what I'm doing here with the spoon is perfectly fine too, okay? So now I'm gonna take the tofu and I'm gonna break it up. And I'm gonna break it up into like relatively big pieces, because I want to keep working this. And if I break it up into really small pieces, the more I work it, then I'm just gonna have really, really tiny pieces. So that goes in there. We'll put a little bit of shoyu in here. Now the recipe calls for dashi, right? And I used up all the dashi. So this is where cooking, this is the cool part about cooking. I'm gonna take some of this, which is mostly dashi, right? I'm gonna add it to that. Now the nice thing is I'm gonna serve these together. So what I'm also doing by adding the dashi from this is, it's almost like you're melding the two flavors together already, and you're bringing them together. So you see, as I stir this, right, it's breaking up the tofu more. Now the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cook the egg, and I want to put in the center here. I'm making a well. But I want it to stick, so I'm gonna add a little bit more oil. Add my egg. Stir it in the middle, like making scrambled eggs in the center, right? I want to keep moving it till it's just set. Yeah, start to bring it all together again. I'm gonna turn the fire off now. Both the pieces. And now we're gonna go to the front and we'll go ahead and plate it. Lots of great, really good nutrients and antioxidants in bitter melon butter. It's really healthy. Tofu is really, good for you. Lots of good protein in here. So when you think about the dish here, egg, it's a really healthy dish.
So someone says, Okinawa people believe Goya promotes good health, long life. Do you know why? What's in it?
What's in it? I mean, it's all the health benefits that I just talked about. I thought there was something else that was a secret. But when you think about Okinawa, right? Okinawa, isn't that one of the blue zones, right? And when you think about the diet that they eat, right? You think about this. There's not a lot of junk in here. Super nutritious, super healthy. They eat a lot of fish, lots of vegetables. Now the pork belly I'm going to show you is decadent, but they're not eating like a 16-ounce slab like a steakhouse steak, right? So it's lots of vegetables, some rice, and small pieces of protein, but mostly driven by seafood, fish, right? So I'm gonna add bonito flakes on top of this too. For flavor, more umami, seasoning. So that's the second dish right there. And now we'll bring the pork together. So what I was doing earlier today before we had class was I was cooking some pork so you can see the difference. So this was what we started with. And then this is what it looked like. And when I talked about pork tender, right? You see how easily this slides in? No resistance whatsoever. You see the shiny glaze. You see how it's reduced? Now I could reduce this further to make it even more glaze and more shiny, but I don't think it needs that. I really like this consistency of the broth. And if I reduce it too much, it just gets really sweet. But you see how when it rolls over it and bathes the pork belly, how shiny it becomes? So this over an hour and a half or so becomes this, and then I take this liquid here and I just further reduce it to this consistency, which makes it a really beautiful glaze. And so I'm gonna bring some in the front, and we'll go ahead and get some on a plate so you can see what that looks like. Remember, like I said, this is rich. So, I'm gonna cut it in pieces that I think, you're gonna have a nice bowl of rice, you're gonna have a couple pieces of this, but you don't want you're not gonna want a massive slab. So
Pot you use, and is there a reason you didn't cover it?
okay, so I didn't cover that one because I wanted you to see. When I was doing this one, I did have it covered, and the covering helps keep it moist and keeps it kind of like self-basting. Whatever pot you're gonna use, both of these pots have a very thick gauge bottom so that it manages the heat well. So the kind of pot that you should be using, and I think is worth investing for all your cooking, is a really heavy duty stainless steel pot with a heavyweight bottom so that it manages the heat very evenly. And then, like I said, you can cover it. Now, again, once it's done braising and it's tender, uncover it because you want to evaporate the liquid. If you keep it covered, it's going to keep sitting in there. So you uncover it, simmer it, and all that moisture comes out. One more piece of it. So imagine this, right, with a nice hot bowl of, on top, hot bowl of rice, a few pieces of this on top. Go ahead and, I want to show you some of that shine. So we'll take some of this braising liquid, glaze it. And there you have it. So you have the Rafute, which is the shoyu braised pork belly. We have the Champuru, which is the bitter melon with tofu and egg, and a little bit of bonito flakes on top. And then to round this out, when you think about it, right, because this pork is so rich, we've got a nice watercress salad with some more tofu and really lots of fresh local tomatoes and a nice dressing that's kind of a shoyu, sesame oil vinaigrette. But again, when you think about this dish and you think about Okinawan, the style of eating, right? Mostly vegetables here, a few small pieces of pork, although rich, but small pieces you're going to eat, and then maybe a nice bowl of rice, and you have a perfect meal. So this is our dinner, or this is our meal in honor of the Okinawan Festival. Are there any last minute questions that I can answer before we sign off here? Sure.
There's a question about the previous recipe, the
Sure.
spicy ahi tuna with the fried rice ball. So this viewer's rice ball wouldn't stay together when she fried it. It broke apart.
What kind of rice was it? Was it regular? It was regular, like medium grain, local style rice. One, make sure it's local style rice, not like long grain, for lack of a better term, like Uncle Ben's or basmati, which is a non-glutinous calrose. That's a non-glutinous rice. So you got to make sure it's a glutinous rice, number one. Number two, make sure that you're pressing it down really, really well, and then you're letting it refrigerate, because by pressing it down and refrigerate, sets it together and compresses it so that it sticks well together. If you were to take it more on the fresh side, try to push it together and fry it, it may come apart because of that. The key is really pressing it, or making sure you're using calrose rice or a glutinous rice that's sticky, pressing it really, really well, letting it set, refrigerating it so it's nice and cold, and then dicing them so that they're hold together. Other questions?
Okay, thank you. A lot of people want to know what you put in the salad dressing again. Can you
Sure.
tell us how you made the salad dressing?
Yeah, so this is all to taste. So I would say 3 to 4 tablespoons shoyu, 3 to 4 tablespoons of rice wine vinegar. I put chili flakes in there, or chili powder in there. I put about a tablespoon of the pickled ginger juice, and then a 1/3, so 3 tablespoons worth of vegetable oil. If you want it to be sweet too, if you don't have the pickled ginger juice, you can add like sugar, or you could add mirin. Those would also be good substitutions as well. And if you want, you could add sesame oil to give it more kind of like meatiness.
Do you eat all the fat on the pork?
Yes. Actually, before we came on, I had to try it because I want to make sure it's good, and I chose the side that had mostly the fat. But here's the thing, if you like things like foie gras, if you like ribeye, I think fat can be, if it's done properly, can be really delicious, right? And if you do it the way that I'm showing you, the fat becomes very, very soft and silky. Like if you envision like really, really fresh, soft tofu, the texture is really, really smooth. It's almost like, and the same thing, like if you enjoy sashimi, right, or sushi, and you want otoro, it's like that rich piece, very velvety and just flavorful. So yes.
And when will the next class be held?
The next class will be held on October 6th. So what is that, like 4 weeks from now, roughly, right? So we'll see everyone in 4 weeks. I still have to think about what we're gonna do, but it's feeling like maybe it should be kind of a fall kind of a recipe. So I'll figure that out, but I'm sure it'll be fun and delicious. And if there's no other questions, then I'll let you all know that I hope you enjoy this. And we saw some pictures of last time people were making the crispy rice, and so it was cool. Please make your pictures, share them with us, and let us know how it came out. And we look forward to seeing them. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.